Most people misunderstand avoidance. They see them as cold, distant, maybe even emotionally unavailable, and in a sense, they are. But here's the truth. Avoidants don't distance themselves because they lack the capacity to love. They distance themselves because they fear it. They've spent a lifetime building walls, constructing a fortress around their heart to protect themselves from pain, rejection, and the chaos of vulnerability. And for most people, those walls are impenetrable. They are designed to repel, not to invite. That's why the avoidant seems untouchable, why so many relationships with them feel like trying to hold water in your hands. But here's the paradox that most people never grasp. The avoidant does bond deeply and for life, but only with one rare person. Not everyone has the privilege of unlocking this level of connection, and it's not because avoidants are impossible to love. It's because avoidants are extraordinarily selective, almost instinctually, about who they allow into the inner sanctum of their emotional world. They are not merely testing people. They are protecting themselves from a lifetime of repeating the same patterns of pain. The person who bonds for life with an avoidant is not someone who chases, nags, or pleads for love. They are not desperate. They are not performative. And they are not willing to bend themselves into a shape that fits the avoidant's fears. Instead, they are what I like to call an emotional disruptor. They enter the avoidant's life and do something that almost no one else can. They interrupt the cycle of avoidance. They show up in a way that is consistent yet unexpected, loving yet firm, and in that moment, the avoidant experiences something that feels both terrifying and intoxicating. They feel safe enough to let their walls crumble. Think about it. Avoidants spend years perfecting the art of emotional camouflage. They push people away before anyone can push them. They disappear when closeness threatens, and they often leave partners wondering if they are truly capable of love. But this rare person doesn't react the way everyone else does. They don't panic when the avoidant retreats. They don't try to force intimacy or control the relationship. Instead, they disrupt the avoidance pattern not with aggression, but with presence. Their consistency, their calm, and their understanding become the very thing that pierces the avoidance defenses. It's almost counterintuitive. You might think the avoidant would run from someone who sees them so clearly, but the opposite happens. When someone is able to hold the avoidant's contradictions without judgment, when they allow them to feel and still remain present, the avoidant experiences what psychologists call earned secure attachment. For the first time, they sense that vulnerability does not have to be dangerous, that intimacy does not equal suffocation, and that someone can love them without erasing their independence. That realization is seismic. It shakes the foundations of everything they thought they knew about relationships. This is why the bond they form with this rare person is so unshakable. It is not based on convenience, attraction, or even temporary need. It is forged in the crucible of emotional disruption, tempered by patience, and sustained by the realization that love does not have to hurt to be real. And once this bond forms, the avoidant does not just stay. They commit at a depth that few outside this rare connection could ever imagine. They've found the one person who didn't try to chase their love, but who instead made it safe for them to come forward on their own terms. So if you ever find yourself wondering why an avoidant seems so resistant to connection, remember this: it's not about a lack of capacity to love. It's about finding the right person, the one who disrupts without demanding, who sees without judging, who stays without suffocating. And when that person appears, when the walls finally come down, the bond that is formed is not temporary. It is rare, it is sacred, and it is for life. So here's the challenge for you. Don't try to force the avoidant's heart. Instead, cultivate the kind of presence, calm, and authenticity that has the power to disrupt patterns, to pierce through defenses, and to show them that love can be safe. Because the moment you do that, you are no longer just another person in their life. You become the one they will bond with for life. If key point 1 taught us about the rare disruptor who cracks the avoidance walls, key point 2 is about the magnetism that keeps them close. You see, avoidants are drawn to people who don't need them in the way the world expects. Most people approach avoidance with longing, with a subtle desperation, and that immediately triggers the avoidance fear of engulfment. They recoil because they sense someone trying to occupy the space they have meticulously carved out for themselves. But the one rare person they bond with for life doesn't approach from need. They radiate unshakable self-worth. Self-worth is magnetic. It's not about confidence that seeks validation. It's about confidence that exists independently. It's the kind of presence that says, I know my value. I know what I bring to a relationship. I don't need you to complete me, but I choose to be with you. And here's why that is so devastatingly powerful. For an avoidant, their entire life has been a push-pull dance, an attempt to balance closeness with self-preservation. When someone approaches them from a place of neediness, they tighten their walls. When someone approaches them from a place of independent strength, the walls begin to feel unnecessary. Avoidants are not used to feeling safe in someone else's strength. Most people crumble under their emotional distance, trying harder and harder to pull them closer. But this rare person refuses to bend under pressure. They understand their own worth and their own boundaries, and they make the avoidant feel, without a word spoken, that love does not have to be earned through manipulation, drama, or sacrifice. That clarity is intoxicating. Think about it for a moment. The avoidant has spent years unconsciously testing people, gauging whether intimacy will lead to pain, whether closeness will lead to loss. They've been seeking security in a world that often teaches them that love is conditional, but the rare person doesn't just provide safety. They embody it. They radiate a sense of self that cannot be shaken, that cannot be coerced, that cannot be bargained with. And when the avoidant witnesses this, it does something profound. It flips a switch. Suddenly, the avoidant wants to move toward this person rather than run. Suddenly, the attraction is not about chasing, but about wanting to be near someone who is whole, complete, and unshakable. This is why unshakable self-worth is not just attractive, it is transformative. It reshapes the avoidant's internal narrative. For decades, they have told themselves that closeness equals danger, that intimacy equals loss, that love equals vulnerability. But when they experience someone who values themselves, someone who does not shrink to make space for their fears, the avoidant begins to rewrite that narrative. They realize that closeness can coexist with autonomy, that love does not have to consume or control, and that someone can be deeply connected to them without being defined by their fears. The rare person is not trying to teach a lesson or fix the avoidant. They simply exist in their full power, fully aware of their value, fully aware of their boundaries, and fully capable of receiving love without desperation. That presence is irresistible. It creates a gravitational pull that is impossible to ignore. The avoidant does not feel trapped. They feel seen, respected, and safe. And that safety, that freedom within connection, is the foundation for a lifelong bond. So here's the critical insight. If you want to connect with an avoidant at the deepest level, you cannot approach from fear, from need, or from insecurity. You must approach from unshakable self-worth. You must know who you are, what you deserve, and what you will not compromise. When you do, you don't just attract an avoidant, you draw them closer in a way that almost no one else can. You become the person who can bond with them for life. And remember this, the avoidance walls are not a reflection of you. They are a reflection of their fear. But your presence, grounded in self-worth, can dismantle those walls gently yet irrevocably. Stand firm, radiate your value, and watch as the avoidant chooses, finally and willingly, to stay. That is the power of self-worth. It doesn't chase, it doesn't beg, it doesn't demand. It simply is, and in its quiet, unwavering strength, it changes everything. If we've already explored the rare disruptor who breaks through an avoidance walls and the magnetism of unshakable self-worth, Then key point 3 is about a paradox so subtle yet so powerful that most people never notice it. The avoidant's deep craving for emotional sovereignty and how the one rare person respects it without fear. Avoidants are terrified of losing themselves in relationships. They have spent years guarding their independence because intimacy to them often feels like a threat to their very identity. To most people, this is frustrating or confusing. Why can't they just open up? But here's the truth. Avoidants are not afraid of love itself. They are afraid of being swallowed by it. This is where the rare bond forms. The person who truly captures the avoidant's heart embodies emotional sovereignty. They love deeply, but do not lose themselves in the process. They remain independent, anchored in their own identity, and yet they are capable of giving and receiving intimacy fully. It's a delicate balance, one that requires both strength and grace, and it is almost unheard of in a world that equates love with merging completely, losing boundaries, and abandoning personal agency. For an avoidant, this paradox is revolutionary. They watch as someone demonstrates that love does not need to suffocate. They see that closeness and independence can coexist. And when that realization hits, it rewires their understanding of relationships. They no longer fear intimacy as a trap. Instead, they begin to see it as a space where they can show up authentically without losing themselves. That is why the rare person is not just desirable, they are transformative. Think about the nervous system of an avoidant. Every instinct they have is designed to protect against engulfment. Every experience of vulnerability has been met with uncertainty, sometimes with pain. And yet, when someone steps into their life with calm independence, with confidence rooted in their own emotional stability, the avoidance system experiences something it has never known: safety. The closeness they once feared now feels like a choice rather than a threat. The paradox is that the very thing they ran from, intimacy, now feels like freedom. It's fascinating because most people misunderstand avoidance as detachment. They interpret it as lack of interest or lack of care. But what we're talking about here is different. The avoidant is deeply interested, deeply capable of love, but only when they feel that their essence will not be absorbed, only respected. Emotional sovereignty in a partner gives them a blueprint. Love does not need to consume. Love can support. Love can expand without demanding surrender. And that understanding is intoxicating for someone whose entire life has been an internal tug of war between desire and fear. This is why relationships with avoidance often fail with people who overstep or overattach. The avoidant retreats because their sense of self feels threatened. But the rare person who honors their autonomy without withdrawing affection achieves something extraordinary. They create a safe container for love, a space where the avoidant can be close without feeling trapped, can be vulnerable without fearing loss of self. And once that container exists, once that balance is achieved, the bond becomes unbreakable. So the lesson here is profound. If you want to form a lasting bond with an avoidant, you cannot approach with clinginess or dependence. You must embody emotional sovereignty yourself. You must show that love does not require surrender. You must love in a way that respects boundaries, honors independence, and invites intimacy without forcing it. The rare avoidant will recognize this immediately because it is exactly what they have been seeking all along, even if they didn't know how to articulate it. And here's the final truth. Independence does not push them away, it draws them in. When you stand firm in your own power while offering love that is steady, compassionate, and non-intrusive, you do more than attract an avoidant. You give them permission to bond fully, to stay, to invest, and to love in a way they never thought possible. Emotional sovereignty is not a game or a trick. It is the doorway to the deepest connection an avoidant will ever allow. So the challenge for you is simple but profound: love with freedom, love without clinging, respect boundaries as sacred. And in doing so, you become not just another person in their life, but the one rare person who makes lifelong attachment possible. That is the paradox. And it is the power of freedom in love creates the deepest intimacy. If we've already explored the rare disruptor who breaks through the avoidance walls, the magnetism of unshakable self-worth, and the power of emotional sovereignty, then key point 4 dives into something even more subtle and profound: the power of being truly seen. Avoidants spend a lifetime hiding parts of themselves, carefully constructing layers of defense. They wear masks to protect their vulnerability, projecting independence and control, when underneath lies a complex mixture of fear, longing, and tenderness. Most people never see beyond the mask. They react to the surface behaviors, the coldness, the distance. But the one rare person who bonds for life does something extraordinary. They look past the walls, past the defenses, and see the avoidant's true self. This isn't just about noticing their pain or understanding their fears. It's about reflecting their hidden depth back to them in a way that is validating, non-judgmental, and deeply humanizing. The avoidant has spent decades fearing exposure, fearing that if anyone truly sees them, they will be rejected or abandoned. And then, unexpectedly, someone comes along who doesn't flinch. They don't run, they don't criticize, and they don't try to change them. They simply see them. That simple act of recognition, of being truly seen, is transformative in ways words cannot fully capture. Think about the psychological impact of this. The avoidant has internalized a narrative that their true self is too much, too vulnerable, too unlovable. Every relationship that failed reinforced this belief. And then this rare person arrives, and they reflect back the avoidant's authentic self with warmth and acceptance. It's like a mirror, but a mirror that doesn't distort, that doesn't demand conformity, that doesn't punish imperfection. For the avoidant, seeing themselves reflected in such clarity, without fear or judgment, is revolutionary. It creates a safe space where trust and intimacy can finally flourish. This is why many avoidants are drawn to partners who are emotionally perceptive yet emotionally stable. They crave someone who can understand without becoming entangled, someone who can acknowledge their fears and vulnerabilities while remaining grounded. When this balance is achieved, the avoidant begins to experience a profound sense of recognition. I am known. I am accepted. I am understood. And in that moment, the avoidant feels a sense of relief they may have never felt before, a release from the constant tension between self-protection and desire for connection. It's important to recognize the difference between seeing and observing. Observing is passive. It notices behaviors, it labels actions. But seeing, in the deep psychological sense, involves perceiving essence. It's the recognition of who someone truly is beneath the surface patterns, beneath the defenses, beneath the carefully curated self-image. When the avoidant experiences someone who sees them in this way, it breaks the cycle of mistrust and detachment. They begin to lower their guard, not because they are forced to, but because they finally feel safe enough to do so. The rare person doesn't attempt to fix the avoidant, and they don't try to solve their fears. They simply reflect the avoidant's true self with steady compassion and unwavering respect. That reflection is a gift so profound that the avoidant's attachment transforms. It is no longer about fear or avoidance. It becomes about choice, connection, and even longing. They want to be seen again, not just superficially, but in the way this person has shown them is possible. So here's the critical insight: to bond with an avoidant at the deepest level, you must cultivate the ability to truly see them. This requires patience, emotional intelligence, and the courage to engage with their vulnerability without judgment. When you can hold that mirror up to them, when you can acknowledge their depth without fear, you give them something that almost no one else ever could, the experience of being fully recognized for who they really are. And remember this: being truly seen is not about changing them, controlling them, or guiding them. It's about creating a space where they can finally show up as themselves. When you do this, you don't just attract an avoidant, you allow them to bond for life. The rare connection isn't forged through force or manipulation, it's forged through the subtle, enduring power of recognition. So the challenge for you is see people for who they are beneath the surface. And if that person is an avoidant, understand that seeing them is the bridge that can transform their fear into lifelong attachment. In your presence, they can finally exhale, finally exist, and finally choose to stay. If we've already explored the rare disruptor, the power of self-worth, emotional sovereignty, and being truly seen, then key point 5 is about something deceptively simple, yet profoundly impactful: boundaries. Avoidants are masters of reading others. They know, often instinctively, when someone is pliable, when someone will compromise themselves, when someone can be manipulated or pushed aside. And most people, unfortunately, give in. They chase, they overextend, they tolerate behavior that undermines them, thinking it's the only way to maintain connection. But the one rare person who bonds with an avoidant for life does the exact opposite. They establish immovable boundaries. Now, when I say immovable boundaries, I don't mean rigid walls, coldness, or detachment. I mean clear, consistent, non-negotiable standards that communicate self-respect. They don't tolerate disrespect, emotional manipulation, or the push-pull games that avoidants unconsciously employ. And here's the fascinating part: this is exactly what the avoidant has been waiting for, even if they don't consciously realize it. Most people either crumble or confront in anger, and the avoidant responds by retreating further. But when someone demonstrates calm strength, someone says, "I will not compromise my values, and I will not be treated as optional," it jolts the avoidance system. This may sound counterintuitive. You might think boundaries push avoidance away. After all, aren't they scared of rules, of constraints, of being controlled? But the opposite is true. The avoidant does not respect those who bend under pressure. They do not value those who sacrifice themselves for attention. What the avoidant unconsciously craves and fears is someone who stands firm, who holds their ground, who communicates clearly, yet does so without aggression or desperation. That strength commands respect, and respect for an avoidant is the soil in which attachment grows. Boundaries create a framework of safety. They show the avoidant that love does not require chaos, that connection does not demand surrender, and that intimacy can coexist with autonomy. When the avoidant experiences a person who is unwavering in their standards, yet steady in their care, it challenges everything they thought they knew about relationships. It shocks them, but in a way that feels stabilizing rather than threatening. Suddenly, the avoidant realizes here is someone I cannot control, cannot manipulate, cannot overwhelm, but someone I deeply want to be with. This is why immovable boundaries are transformative. They teach the avoidant, silently but powerfully, that closeness is not about power struggles. They show that love is not transactional, and they convey, without drama, a truth the avoidant has long needed to learn. Some people are not optional. Some people do not chase, negotiate, or waver. Some people simply exist in their own integrity, and in doing so, they command attachment rather than fear. Boundaries also reinforce the avoidant's choice to engage. Avoidants do not commit lightly. They do not stay for convenience. But when someone demonstrates unwavering standards, when someone models self-respect while offering consistency, the avoidant feels an unusual mix of admiration and security. They may test, they may pull back, they may retreat, but the very firmness of the other person's boundaries keeps the avoidant tethered. It communicates, "I am not your escape, but I am your safe ground." So here's the critical insight. If you want to bond with an avoidant for life, you cannot be pliable or compromised. You cannot allow yourself to be pulled off balance. You must stand firm, communicate clearly, and honor your own needs. The rare avoidant recognizes that strength immediately. It signals that this person is not someone to chase, someone to control, or someone to take for granted. They are someone worthy of long-term attachment, someone who can weather the challenges of intimacy without fear or collapse. And remember this, immovable boundaries are not a threat. They are an invitation. They invite the avoidant to engage, to invest, and ultimately, to bond at a level that most people never experience. When boundaries are paired with consistency, empathy, and presence, they do more than command respect. They build trust, and trust is the foundation of lifelong attachment. The challenge for you is clear: define your standards, honor your integrity, and refuse to settle for less than you deserve. Because in doing so, you do not repel the avoidant, you draw them closer. You create the conditions for a bond that is not temporary, not conditional, but rare, sacred, and enduring. Strength, clarity, and consistency are not barriers, they are the bridge. If we've walked through the rare disruptor, unshakable self-worth, emotional sovereignty, being truly seen, and immovable boundaries, then key point 6 brings us to the culmination. The unconditional anchor, the one element that transforms avoidance into lifelong attachment. Avoidants, at their core, are searching for safety, not in a conventional sense, but in a deep, emotional sense. They have spent so much of their lives on alert, protecting themselves from perceived threats in intimacy, that trust is rare and fleeting. Most people cannot sustain it, and most relationships collapse under the weight of their fears. But the rare person who bonds with an avoidant for life creates something extraordinary, a consistent, unwavering presence that does not demand perfection, but invites genuine connection. This is the essence of the unconditional anchor. It is not about trying to fix, control, or save the avoidant. It is about being a constant in a world where unpredictability has shaped every defensive instinct they possess. The avoidance nervous system is highly attuned to inconsistency. They have learned, often painfully, that love can be conditional, that closeness can turn into chaos, that vulnerability can be punished. But when someone enters their life who is emotionally reliable, someone who shows up, remains present, and responds with calm steadiness, they begin to experience trust in its purest form. Consider the psychological impact of this. For decades, the avoidant has equated intimacy with danger. They have learned to expect disappointment, to anticipate withdrawal, to brace for rejection. And then, gradually, subtly, they encounter someone who does not react to their defenses with frustration, who does not punish them for emotional distance, and who does not withdraw in the face of complexity. This consistency is not passive. It is active, conscious, and profoundly disciplined. It teaches the avoidant a lesson their mind has struggled to accept, that closeness does not have to hurt, that love does not have to be volatile, that attachment does not require surrendering oneself entirely. The unconditional anchor also allows the avoidant to take emotional risks. They begin to test vulnerability in small ways, and each time they are met with acceptance rather than judgment, trust grows. Slowly but inexorably, they start to let down their defenses, not because they are forced to, but because they feel safe enough to do so. That is the rare miracle in relationships with avoidance. They bond deeply and permanently, but only when someone provides a sanctuary rather than a challenge. The rare person understands that love is a steady current, not a storm to be weathered. This is why the avoidance lifelong bond is so selective. They do not give themselves to many people, because few can maintain this kind of presence. It requires patience, emotional intelligence, and a profound respect for autonomy. It demands the capacity to love without clinging, to offer support without overstepping, and to remain emotionally grounded regardless of the avoidance fluctuations. And when it is offered, the avoidant recognizes it almost instinctively. They feel that rare combination of freedom and safety, and they choose to stay because it is the first time in their life they have experienced a relationship on equal footing, one that is both intimate and non-threatening. So here is the ultimate insight: the person who becomes an avoidance anchor does not control or coerce. They do not demand compliance or perfection. They simply provide unwavering presence, consistent emotional availability, and acceptance of the avoidant as they are. That combination, steadfast love without intrusion, is what transforms a fleeting connection into a lifelong bond. It is rare, sacred, and almost magical in its simplicity. And here is your call to reflection. If you want to be the person an avoidant bonds with for life, cultivate this anchor within yourself. Be steady, consistent, compassionate, and resilient. Honor boundaries, respect independence, and offer love that is safe, not demanding. In doing so, you do not just attract an avoidant. You create the conditions for a rare, enduring, and transformative connection. The ultimate truth is simple but profound. When love becomes a sanctuary rather than a storm, an avoidant does not run. They stay for life.